Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Better Call Saul Season 2, Episode 9, Nailed. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul, so I have to give a spoiler warning up to Better Call Saul Season 2, Episode 9. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So, this episode was amazing. Man, it was so good. I think it's official that Better Call Saul is following the Game of Thrones format, where episode 9 is the episode you have to look out for each year, the one where things really go down. So we start with the episode immediately with the payoff to last week's episode, as we see the truck that Hector Salamanca uses to smuggle things that we followed so intimately last week, traveling down an empty desert road where Mike is there lying in wait with those spiky hose thingy, and just as we suspected, he uses it to cripple the truck. He then very expertly sneaks up on the driver, gags and blindfolds him, as well as tying him up, where Mike goes directly for the tires as he knows the money is there, and finds a lot of money and takes it. And it's also good to note that he's wearing a ski mask and he never speaks, so the driver has no idea who he is. So this was what Mike had in store for Hector. Very interesting. He pulls it off so well without a hitch. We get a bit of a preamble on what an effective badass that Mike will become in Breaking Bad. Of course, we see here he's already a badass, but kind of in a different way, as Mike still won't kill people at this stage. So then we see Chuck and Howard ready to go to court to finalize the paperwork for Mesa Verde's new branch. Howard says that they can do it without Chuck, but Chuck insists on going as it's a real important occurrence. However, pretty much just a formality. So they go to court, and everything seems to be going fine until the secretary starts talking to the chairman, as there's a discrepancy, and of course it's that the application forms have the wrong address, as we knew it would because of Jimmy's tampering that we saw last week. Of course, Chuck thinks that it's the incorrect address, so he insists to his clients, and is kind of making an ass out of himself, but eventually realizes that the address is wrong and asks to fix the problem and move on, but the committee insists that they have to delay for 6 weeks because they need to start from scratch, which the clients are not happy about, as they wanted to open the bank right away and already have money invested in doing so. So this is basically a huge, humiliating moment for Chuck, and I love how they play up the sound of electricity towards the end of the scene, letting the audience know that the electricity is really getting to him. So then Chuck goes home to check his documents and finds that it is showing the correct address, and of course that's because Jimmy came in and returned the correct documents while Chuck was out in court in order to hide the evidence and make it appear like Chuck simply made a mistake, which is certainly what Howard believes. So next we see Mike scoping out the restaurant the Salamancas get their supplies from, and sees that Hector is flipping the fuck out, and this apparently makes Mike very happy, as he goes to a bar and buys a round of drinks for everyone. Well, part of this is because, of course, he has the money now. After all, the money, that is a lot of money that he stole, but it also has to do with him being in such a good mood after seeing Hector flip out. So ultimately the main reason he did this was to get back at Hector rather than to get money. Mike's really similar to Walter White in this regard, as the whole reason he wanted to strike back at Hector was because of pride, because he couldn't stand the fact that Hector got the better of him and forced him to do something. So I think it's worth noting that pride is an issue for Mike and Walter White, but not for Jimmy, as Jimmy had no compunction about groveling and giving in to Tuco Salamanca. That, may make him a coward, but also a bit smarter as well. So next we see Jimmy and Kim preparing their new office, moving the furniture, painting the walls, and all that, when Kim receives a call from her friend at Mercer Verde, who, of course, wants to hire Kim back. And obviously, she's over the moon, but starts freaking out a bit as she's worried she won't be able to handle a case this huge by herself. But Jimmy reassures her that she will be able to do it. Now, I think Jimmy is being really sweet here and proving why Kim likes him so much and deserves to stick by him, and that they both truly love each other, because he was being very supportive, giving her the encouragement she needs to continue. So this was a nice little moment between the two of them, showing the strength of their relationship. But then Kim gets a call from Ernie that Chuck would like her to come by immediately to pick up the Mercer Verde case files. And so Jimmy offers to come along to help carry the boxes and deal with Chuck. However, when they get there, Jimmy finds his keys no longer work and he can't get into the house. Ernie opens the door for them and tells Jimmy that Chuck had the locks changed. Then they go to find Chuck quite upset and unresponsive to Jimmy, and he tells Kim that he would have preferred to speak to her alone, but says it's about time he has it out with Jimmy as well. So Chuck goes on to outline exactly what Jimmy did by stealing his files while he was passed out and making altered copies so that Chuck would have the incorrect address. And once Chuck got the wrong address, he returned the original documents, making it look like Chuck simply made an error. So this scene was amazing, absolutely amazing. This is some of the best drama, best acting I have seen in a long time. I know that Jonathan Banks got nominated for the Emmy for Best Supporting Actor last year, and he deserved it, but this year I think it should be Michael McKean. Jonathan Banks was still great this season, he's great every year, but for my money, Michael McKean was by far the standout, and this scene alone was just so amazing. So, Chuck tried to talk directly to Kim and ignore Jimmy's outbursts, and everyone's acting here is just so top-notch, because you can see while Chuck was telling his story, you can tell this is upsetting Kim, and the look on Jimmy's face, that you can just tell that he's really ashamed about Kim hearing about all this. And so when I think Kim knew Chuck was saying was true, because of the look on Jimmy's face, it just gave it all away. In particular, when Chuck told Kim that he did it for her as a twisted romantic gesture, and the look on Jimmy's face completely gave it away, and you could tell Kim knew it was true because she was looking really pissed at him. And then it got really intense when Chuck professed that he can't stand that his own brother stabbed him in the back, and this was just so super intense. However, Kim asks what proof he has, and he says the only proof he has is that he knows his brother, to which Kim replies that that's probably a simpler explanation, that Chuck simply made a mistake, which happens. She mentions that he's reading all night over lantern light, and so it's understandable one could make a mistake. But when Chuck gets upset and insists that it wasn't a mistake, she she came up with these elaborate theory in order to blame his brother. And then what she says next was amazing, when she says she knows Jimmy's not perfect, but it's Chuck's fault that Jimmy turned out this way, because Jimmy idolizes Chuck, but in return all Chuck ever does is judge him, and he never believed in him or wanted him to succeed. But when Kim and Jimmy leave Chuck's house and get in the car to drive off, you can tell Kim is completely seething with rage, and barely containable rage, and Jimmy is just looking nervous, hoping she's not mad at him, so he tries to gently caress her, and in response her anger explodes and she hits him. When Jimmy acts surprised, she just wails on him even harder. Jimmy still pretends that he doesn't know what's going on, so Kim just tells him to just drive. Oh man, that was so good. So now that was just such an awesome scene, amazing scene. I'd have to say it's got to be one of my all-time favorite scenes in all of television, right up there with the Tyrion trial scene from season 4 of Game of Thrones. This was just so amazing. So let me take a few moments to unpack it. So on the surface, it seems like Chuck is totally in the right, that he was betrayed, stabbed in the back by his own brother, and absolutely humiliated by him because Jimmy did something that was really deceptive, highly illegal for his own petty purposes. And that, when Kim was yelling at Chuck, she was just putting on an act because it was clear to her that Chuck was right and she wanted to protect Jimmy from legal action, and was doing it also for her own selfish purposes because she didn't want to risk losing the Mercer Verde case, which was really important for her financially. However, if we dig a bit deeper, I think we can see that Kim actually had a really good point of what she said about Chuck, that it wasn't just BS. What she said about Chuck was actually entirely spot on, and she completely believed it as well, and could tell from the interactions she had with Jimmy that Jimmy idolized him and looked up to him and supported him, and all that he ever wanted was his love and support. But all of Chuck did instead was judged him and never believed in him. So I want to dispel the notion that Chuck is the innocent victim here. Yes, Jimmy did stab Chuck in the back and betray him by going too far and breaking the law, but Chuck is far from the innocent victim. They presented a situation as so much more dynamic than that, so I've been talking about this for a long time, how Chuck shares a lot of the blame on why Jimmy became the type of person that he did. Because you can clearly see a correlation between when Chuck doubts Jimmy more or fights against him more, it has a direct effect on Jimmy going back to act like a con man even more. As in all the time Jimmy spent in the mailroom at HHM, he was aspiring to become more and be a straight up high class lawyer and basically trying to be like Chuck. He was just emulating him. But as soon as he found out that Chuck was purposely trying to sabotage him and didn't believe him at all, Jimmy immediately wanted to abandon lawyering altogether and go back to being a complete con man. And you saw this play out in smaller interactions with how the more Chuck pushed, the more Jimmy wanted to do shady things. I firmly believe that if Chuck did fully support Jimmy and show that he believed in him from the beginning, Jimmy would have become a straight up and up lawyer. He might still be a bit sleazy because it's in his nature, not necessarily work for Davis and Maine and be as high up as Chuck, but he wouldn't be acting like slipping Jimmy all the time. I think it's directly related to Chuck not supporting him, and Chuck's rants about how Jimmy will always be slipping Jimmy is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more he says it, the more it's true. And the reason Chuck doubts him so much has more to do with his own insecurities, which was so brilliantly shown in the episode Rebecca, where we got a flashback with Chuck and his wife, where it was obvious that he was jealous of Jimmy, which is also obvious in other ways that Chuck holds latent resentment towards Jimmy that is more selfish-based than anything else. In talking more specifically about the recent case with Mercer Verde, it was obvious that Chuck took such an interest in this case to purposely try to sabotage Jimmy. In fact, it's obvious his own motivations for being involved in the HHM so much recently is solely just to sabotage Jimmy. And unfortunately, Kim is a side victim to this, in the sense that because she's associated with Jimmy, Chuck strikes at her in order to get to Jimmy. So because when Chuck first heard Kim took away Mercer Verde, I don't think he would have really cared if it wasn't for the fact that he heard that she was working with Jimmy. He most certainly wouldn't have went all hard out and did this big song and dance to ensure Mercer Verde didn't leave HHM. So yeah, Chuck has actively been trying to sabotage Jimmy, but he won't admit it. In fact, he's lying to himself that that's what he's doing, and actually believes the crap that he says about just trying to be a good lawyer, but obviously is just letting his own petty, selfish resentment and inability to let go of the past get the better of him. So the only difference between Chuck and Jimmy in this situation really is what Chuck does is legal and above board, whereas what Jimmy does is shady and illegal, but they're both being petty and trying to sabotage each other. In fact, Jimmy is more reacting to Chuck trying to sabotage him. The difference is that Chuck is an awesome, experienced lawyer, whereas Jimmy is best at doing con jobs. So they each attack each other in the way that best suits their abilities. So it just so happens that Chuck's way is legal and Jimmy's way isn't. Also, I like how Kim specifically brings up the fact that Jimmy took care of him, because really, Chuck was being ungrateful for all that Jimmy did for him, because under his current condition, because all throughout season 1, Jimmy was taking care of Chuck, standing up for him, completely believed in him. In fact, it's only because of Jimmy that Chuck found the strength to leave the house in the first place, and he uses his newfound strength in order to attack Jimmy and sabotage him, which is totally ungrateful. So before you go assuming Jimmy's the bad guy in this situation, take a harder look at Chuck, as he shares in just as much blame as Jimmy does, in my opinion. And it was amazing finally seeing someone say this right to his face. So next, we move on to Jimmy going with his film student buddies, and he has acquired a makeup girl as well, as they break into an elementary school in order to film in front of the American flag. Now, this was a cute little scene that I thought was quite funny, but it seemed kind of out of place to the rest of the episode and felt a tad bit jarring. But that is just a very, very, very minor complaint. I do think this scene was meant to show that Jimmy wasn't deterred at all at what had just happened with Chuck, and he goes right back to being his sleazy self. In fact, he seems like he puts a lot of effort in just to save a few bucks. Seems like it would have been far easier had they just simply gotten permission. However, I think it's meant to show that Jimmy gets a kick out of pulling scams like this, and he does it more for fun more than anything else. I would have thought, though, that Jimmy would have researched his lie a bit more, as he seems a bit ridiculous to say Rupert Holmes went to school there. And I do think the principal was being a bit dense by buying his weak workaround after she explained that the school was built in 1971. But I suppose the whole point is Jimmy is so good he can sell anything regardless of how far-fetched it is. But I still think it requires a bit of naivete on the part of the mark. But I completely loved how the makeup girl was like, "Oh, isn't Rupert Holmes English?" That was hilarious. That was a big laugh out loud moment for me. It was great how Jimmy just bounced right back from that. So we're getting all these scenes about Jimmy filming his commercial. I'm starting to think this commercial is going to be a big deal, they're certainly hyping it. So I was thinking it might even become the first Better Call Saul commercial. But I think it's a bit too early for that. However, it will definitely be the prototype that those commercials are based on, and I think will be successful in pushing Jimmy to become a stronger, independent lawyer and giving him a lot of business. So next we go back to Mike as he's chilling at the diner making friends. As is obvious, he's still in a good mood. It also goes to show he's isn't being too crazy with his money, as he's still drinking cheap coffee and reading his newspaper at a diner, just as he always would. When he gets a call from Nacho, who insists that they meet. So when they do meet, Nacho reveals that he figured out that it was Mike who ripped off the truck, which he revealed was actually $250,000. Now that's a fuck ton of money. However, Nacho states he doesn't want to squeeze Mike, and if he wants to rip off the cartels, then fine, whatever. But he's worried that he'll get caught, because if Mike gets caught, then it will lead back to him. So Nacho assumes the driver was involved, but Mike explains he had nothing to do with it, and he planned this whole thing himself. I love Mike's response when Nacho claims that it's not possible, and he says, "Well, all I can tell you is you guys aren't as smart as you think you are." That was awesome. However, Nacho deduces that this was all Mike just trying to get the cops onto Hector, so he starts to freak out and puts his hand on his gun, to which Mike just calmly states that he needs to take his hand out of his pocket. And I think Nacho really thought this through and realized that Mike is a badass who is a lot more effective than he seemed to be, and realizes that he should not fuck with him. So he goes to leave Mike. But Mike presses him about why wasn't the incident in the papers, and Nacho reveals it was because they completely cleaned up the incidents so the cops or nobody else ever knew about it, and that included killing an innocent bystander who just happened by. And so obviously Mike is not going to feel great about that, as his actions essentially got some innocent person killed. So now I think Mike isn't done with Hector because of that, and I think we're going to get the no half measures Mike, where Mike fully realizes that he needs to kill in order to protect the innocent. So next we see Kim and Jimmy in bed together. Kim seems kind of cold to him, but at least she's still with him and isn't actively being angry towards him, which I think in and itself is really telling, as she didn't let what she knows about what he did affect her, and decided to stay with him, and that she still wants to be with him anyway. But Jimmy can tell she's still bothered by what happened, so asks if she wants to talk about it, but she says not now, not ever. So basically she knows what he did, and he knows that she knows, but they never actually say this aloud. They have this silent understanding, and the understanding that she's totally not okay with it, but still going to stay with him and support him. Next, Jimmy goes to sleep, and then Kim starts talking about how great of a lawyer Chuck is, and how he would make a formidable adversary, and that anyone going up against him better have all of their I's dotted and all of their T's crossed. And then Jimmy gets her meaning, slowly gets up and walks out of the room. I love this scene. I love how Kim refused to talk directly about it, but still telling him he better make sure he has all of his bases covered. So Jimmy goes to the one loose end he has left, the copy place that he went to before. I'm actually really surprised that Jimmy didn't think of this earlier, as Chuck even mentioned during his tirade, I bet you went to an overnight copy place. So Jimmy drives to the copy place he went to find Ernie is already there questioning the guy who works there, so he can deduce that the guy who works there, whose name is Lance, told Ernie he recognized Jimmy, and so Ernie left to go get Chuck. So then we get this another amazing scene where Jimmy goes, he does his thing, but he's, not conning Lance, but he's bribing him and getting him to completely lie to Chuck and say that he was never there. And I like how he's being completely thorough in making sure that the videotapes are erased, as well as making sure there's absolutely no evidence for anything. So then, Jimmy waits outside for Chuck to come, and Chuck comes in and asks Lance, who's completely changed his story now, about Jimmy, which is obviously very much upsets Chuck, but the clerk is really good and sticks to his story, so Chuck absolutely starts to lose it, and we get more electrical sounds. As we can tell, electricity is really getting to him. He eventually passes out and bangs his head on the counter on the way down, and that was just brutal. I kind of knew that what Jimmy did to Chuck was going to lead to Chuck getting hurt in a very big way. I didn't know how it would go down, but I knew something like this would happen. And it was another tense and amazing scene. So my rating for Nailed out of 10 is a 10, the best. In fact, this is one of the episodes I want to give an 11 to, but that's a cop-out, so I'm sticking to my system and going to give it my highest rating. But this episode was truly amazing, and I don't think I'm being overly hyperbolic by saying that this was one of the best episodes of television I have ever seen, and purely one of the best acted pieces of drama I have ever seen. God damn, this show is amazing. So before I go, I want to give my predictions for the finale next week, and that includes talking about the promo for next week's episode. So if you don't want to hear about the promo, you should tune out right now. So in the promo, we see Chuck in the hospital, and then we see Hamlin on the phone to Jimmy holding a piece of paper saying, I just have one question for you, Jimmy. Are you behind this? Now, some people may assume that what he's holding there is proof of the forgery that Jimmy just committed, and Hamlin is asking if he was behind sabotaging the Marcia Verde case. But I think that that's a red herring. I think what Hamlin is really talking about is in order to have Chuck committed to a mental institution. Now, we saw in season 1 last time Chuck got sent to the hospital. The doctors there wanted to commit Chuck to a mental institution as they were convinced Chuck's condition was psychological, not physical. But at the time, Jimmy outright refused. In fact, he assumed that Hamlin was angling for this because if Chuck were committed, Hamlin would assume full control over HHM. However, after later revelations, it's pretty apparent that that isn't the case. But now that Chuck is back in the hospital over the same thing, I think the doctors are going to be even more insistent that he be sent to a mental institution, and Jimmy is the one who gets to make that determination. And I believe Jimmy's going to have a talk with Chuck where Chuck completely talks down to Jimmy and says he won't rest until he sees Jimmy exposed for what he did. And that will motivate Jimmy to say yes to the doctors, and they will indeed commit Chuck to a mental institution. But that's my prediction. We'll see how this goes down. Now, as far as the Mike storyline, in the trailer we see him shoot sniper rifles with that arms dealer guy. So I think it's apparent he's not going to let the Hector thing go because of the fact that Hector killed an innocent bystander, and will then decide to actually kill Hector, but will instead be responsible for paralyzing him and putting him in the chair that he's in Breaking Bad. But we'll see. So I was going to predict that we would get the name Saul Goodman next episode, and I do think that would be a great way to end the season. But with further thought, I don't think that that's going to happen. I think he's not going to call himself Saul Goodman until after Kim leaves him, and I don't think that will happen until season 3. I think season 2 is about him becoming a sleazy independent lawyer, and season 3 will be more about him getting involved in the criminal element, perhaps with Mike's storyline looping back to connect back with his. And that is going to be what alienates Kim and makes her decide to split for good, because although she can tolerate him being sleazy, she won't be able to tolerate him becoming an out-and-out criminal. And I think once she leaves, that's when he'll go full and complete Saul Goodman, but we'll see. Either way, I'm predicting this season will be the last time that we see Chuck, but we'll see. So that's it for my video on Nailed. Be sure to check back here next week as I review the finale of Better Call Saul, and check out my channel for Game of Thrones reviews as Game of Thrones starts just in a couple of weeks, and I will be doing a review for Game of Thrones as well as a discussion video with my brother. And also I do videos on many other shows like Star Trek, Vikings, Fear the Walking Dead, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.